This video is sponsored by CardKingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Before we get started with today's video, I do want to say that if you enjoy my content and aren't already subscribed, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Over half of my audience isn't subscribed, and I would really appreciate it. Anyway, I've been making MTG Top 10s for a pretty long time now, since February of 2016. Over the last 6+ years, I've done 469 of them, and sometimes it's necessary to go back to old lists and update them, and that's what we're doing today with a look at Trample, a topic I originally covered on March 9th of 2018, so it's been more than 4 years, and as you might imagine, the list has changed a lot in that span of time. Trample is an evergreen keyword, which means that it appears on significant numbers of cards in every single set. It's one of the game's oldest mechanics. It's as old as the game of Magic itself, since it first appeared in Alpha. A creature with Trample can deal excess damage to the controller of the creature that blocked it. It most frequently appears in green, with red coming in second, but it actually appears on cards of all 5 colors. To be eligible for this list, a card basically had to have the word Trample somewhere in the text box. In all, there were 1,030 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll take a look at the 10 Trample cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. As is usually the case in lists where I revisit old topics, we'll also talk about the cards that were on the list last time, but aren't on it this time. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first-tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships, and a second-tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Fests. Alright, let's take a look at the 3 cards that were on the list in 2018, but didn't make it this time around. First, there's Grim FLAYER, who came in at number 8 last time. He starts out as a 2-mana 2/2 Trampler, but if you meet the Delirium requirement, he becomes a 4/4, and you don't need me to tell you that a 2-mana 4/4 with Trample is pretty imposing. He also helps you get Delirium going in the first place, since if he does combat damage to the opponent, you get to look at your top 3 cards and put any of them into your graveyard, and you can also reorganize them on top of your library any way you want. So he gives you some pretty nice card selection and some nice graveyard synergy while hitting pretty hard. Unsurprisingly, the FLAYER has been played in various graveyard-based aggro decks in Standard, Modern, and Pioneer. He's gained 2 points in the last 4 years, but it took 73 points to make the list this time, so the FLAYER wasn't particularly close to making the list with its 45. I don't think he'll ever make it back to the list either, as he just isn't being played at a very high rate these days with only that single top 8 over the last 4 years. GARRUK Relentless also lost his spot on the list after coming in at number 7 last time. He's a really cool double-faced planeswalker. On the Relentless side, he can make wolf tokens, or he can damage an opposing creature. If he survives damaging that creature, he transforms into GARRUK the Veil Cursed, who can also put wolf tokens into play, but now they have Death Touch. He also has a -1 that allows you to tutor up a creature by sacrificing a creature, and, importantly for this list, his ultimate gives Trample and +X to your whole board, where X is the number of creature cards you have in your graveyard. GARRUK was heavily played in green decks in both Block and Standard, and he even gained a few points in Modern and Legacy, but he hasn't gained any points since 2017, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. And the last card to fall off of the list from last time is NISSA, WORLDWAKER, who was at number 5 last time. She has 2 +1s. The first one lets you animate a land so that it becomes a 4/4 with Trample. Her other +1 lets you untap lands, but her ultimate also involves Trample, since she animates a bunch of lands into 4/4 Tramplers. She found her way into a whole lot of decks, including Jund, Devotion to Green, and Abzan midrange. She doesn't have any points from outside of Standard though, and that means she hasn't gained any points since 2015. And she isn't ever going to make it back on the list. So, those are the 3 cards that didn't make the list this time. No big surprises there, as all 3 of them haven't really seen any significant play over the last 4 years. Now, let's move to the list proper. At number 10, it is Huntmaster of the Fells, who, well, fell from the number 4 slot that it held back in 2018. The Huntmaster doesn't have Trample in its human form, but once it transforms, it has it. The sweetest thing about the Huntmaster is the amount of value it generates as it goes back and forth between its two sides. When it enters the battlefield, it gives you a 2/2 wolf and gains you 2 life. Then, when it transforms into the Ravager of the Fells, it does 2 damage to a creature and an opponent, and if it turns into the Huntmaster again, it generates yet another wolf, and so on. So, yeah, it can really take over games and give way more than 4 mana's worth of value. It was played a lot in both block and standard, where it appeared in decks like Naya and Jund midrange, and it's also been played in modern Jund decks and more recently in the format's Ponza decks. All of its points over the last few years have come in modern, where it is really just seeing sporadic play. So the Huntmaster is likely to continue to gain points, but probably not at a very significant clip, so its future on the list is in jeopardy. At number 9, it is KESSIG Wolf Run, which plummeted down to number 9 after coming in at number 3 last time. This is a land that can pump your creatures and give them trample, and that's some pretty nice utility to have on a land, and a great place to sink mana when you're flooding out. It can potentially make pretty much any creature into an absolute monster. It was very heavily played in standard, like most good utility lands are. There wasn't really a reason you wouldn't play the Wolf Run in a deck that could activate this ability. It was especially nasty in Primeval Titan decks because those decks could generate a lot of mana and tutor up Wolf Run in the first place. It used to see significant play in Modern 2, where it's gained points in decks like Zoo, Ponza, and Amulet Titan, but it's only gained a single point in that format or any format in the last 4 years, and it doesn't look super likely that it's going to hold on to its spot on the list if I visit it again in a few years. At number 8, it is EMRAKUL, the Promised End. EMRAKUL has been very active over the last 4 years, gaining 37 points. This allowed EMRAKUL to move up from the number 9 slot on the list to the number 8 slot. It comes with a Delirium-like cost reduction effect that pays you off for having different card types in the graveyard, so casting EMRAKUL for 6 or 7 is a real possibility, and when you do, she brings an absolutely massive body to the table that is virtually impossible to block, thanks to both flying and trample, and she also can't really die to instants. While all of that is pretty impressive, it's EMRAKUL's cast trigger that makes her really crazy. She lets you steal an opposing player's turn. And yes, that player then gets to have another turn, but you can absolutely wreck them by stealing one of their turns, even if they get one right after. You can fire off all of their spells on their own creatures, make their creatures attack into yours, and so on. So by the time they get to have that turn, they're usually pretty much entirely wrecked. Early on in her time in Standard, she was played in Emerge and Delirium decks, but she got really busted after the introduction of Kaladesh and Aetherworks Marvel. The Marvel made it so you could get EMRAKUL into play very early, and because Marvel technically lets you cast the card for no mana, you even get the turn-stealing effect. Ultimately, this led to the banning of EMRAKUL, the Promised End, in Standard. However, EMRAKUL has gained a ton of points in all the other formats, allowing it to stay very active over the years. In Pioneer, it's seen play in Devotion to Green and Delirium. In Modern, you can find it in decks capable of producing tons of mana, like Amulet Titan, Tron, and Omnath. In Legacy, it's played in Cloud Post ramp decks, as well as Eldrazi Tribal, and it's also gained a few points in Landstill decks in Legacy. So, EMRAKUL is super active and likely to continue to move up this list in the future. At number 7, it's EMBERCLEAVE, which didn't even exist back in 2017 since it was only printed in 2019's Throne of Eldraine. It became one of the format-defining cards of Eldraine Standard because it's so powerful in really aggressive decks. Attacking with all your creatures and casting the cleave for a tiny amount of mana is just insane, as the combination of trample and double strike inflicts massive amounts of damage out of nowhere. While it isn't in Standard anymore, it is seeing significant play in Historic and Pioneer aggro decks. It's a powerhouse, and while it has really slowed down since rotating out of Standard, it looks like it has a fairly bright future. So I think it has a shot at remaining on this list. At number 6, it's Reality Smasher. Back in 2018, it barely made the list at number 10, but it's been very active over the last 4 years, gaining 48 additional points. The Smasher is a 5-mana 5/5 with Trample and Haste, meaning it can represent a very quick clock. In addition to that, it isn't easy to kill with removal. If you want to do it, you have to discard an additional card or the spell gets countered. That means this is going to be a 2-for-1 at worst in most situations, and your opponent will often be in a place where they just have to use removal on it or die. In Standard, the Smasher found its way into a variety of aggro decks, but where it's truly frightening is in formats with fast mana. In Modern, it helped break the format along with other Eldrazi that were paired with Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple. You could play a Reality Smasher as early as turn 2 in those decks, which is pretty scary. The Eye was eventually banned out of the format, but the Smasher has made the transition to modern Eldrazi Tron decks, and it continues to find success there. Obviously, mana can be even sillier in Legacy and Vintage, where Eldrazi aggro decks are top-tier decks, and the Smasher is a part of that too. It's not going to stop gaining points anytime soon. At number 5, it is Primeval Titan, which has moved up a single slot since 2018. The Titan is a 6-mana 6/6 Trampler with the powerful ability to tutor up any 2 lands in your deck and put them onto the battlefield, tapped. And it does this when it enters the battlefield and when it attacks. In Standard, it was played alongside KESSIG Wolfrun, as I mentioned earlier. It's gained the most points, though, by far, in Modern, where it's been a format-defining card since the format began in 2011. In that format, it's used in Valakut decks since it can help you tutor up Valakut itself and lots of mountains. It also has a deck named for it in Modern called Amulet Titan, which uses Amulet of Vigor to make the Titan even better. With the Amulet, the lands can now enter untapped, and the deck can also play the Titan very early in the game, since it uses Ravnica bounce lands and effects that let the player play multiple lands in a turn to generate 6 mana as early as turn 2. Those decks can go for a combo kill with the Titan at that point by searching up Slayer's Stronghold and Sunhome Fortress of the Legion, who can combine to make the Trampling Titan win the game in a single swing. In addition to that, the Titan can tutor up all kinds of other utility lands, which can be really powerful on your huge creature. Primeval Titan decks have also started to emerge in Legacy over the last few years. There's no doubt that the Titan is going to keep on gaining points. At number 4, it's Shadowspear, another card that didn't even exist back in 2018. It was printed in 2020's Theros Beyond Death, and it's quickly become a heavily played card in multiple formats. It's cheap to play and to equip for the impressive boost of +1/+1 Trample and Lifelink, and it even comes with some additional upside in the ability to just turn off Hexproof and Indestructible. In Standard, it was played a fair amount, but it was a sideboard card more often, as it's pretty challenging to beat for aggro decks. It's also gained points in Pioneer, Historic, Modern, and Legacy. One of the best things about it is that it can be tutored up by cards like Urza's Saga and Stoneforge Mystic, which are fairly heavily played cards in both Modern and Legacy. These days, a singleton Shadowspear tends to be an auto-include in decks running one of those cards. Tutoring up a card this powerful is a good way to put yourself in a great position in the early game. It's going to keep gaining points, and it has a very real shot at moving up this list even more. At number 3, it's HYDROID KRASIS, the last card to make the list that didn't even exist in 2018. This is a flying and trampling Hydra jellyfish that is super powerful. As long as you pay 2 or more for X, you end up with a great deal, especially because you get the life and the cards from the KRASIS whether or not it resolves. And the fact that it has X in its cost means you can always run it out earlier if you need to. Basically, it's both a win condition and a way to draw more cards and gain life, which goes a long way towards helping you stabilize. The KRASIS was already a heavily played card, and then Oko came along and made blue-green decks kind of unbeatable, primarily in Bant and Sultai control decks, and that was even better for the KRASIS. Even after Oko got banned though, HYDROID KRASIS continued to find success in ramp decks like those utilizing NISSA, who shakes the world. Pumping a ton of mana into HYDROID KRASIS is just crazy powerful and hard to beat. HYDROID KRASIS is one of the most heavily played cards in all of Standard while it was legal there, but it hasn't actually done a whole lot in other formats so far, gaining points here and there in both Pioneer and Historic, but it isn't close to being a card that you should expect to see with regularity in those formats, and it hasn't gained a single point in 2022 so far. While it has an impressive score right now, it's very likely that it will get passed by cards like Reality Smasher, Shadowspear, and Primeval Titan in the coming years, since those cards are multi-format all-stars seeing play at a much higher rate since they rotated out of Standard. At number 2, it's Siege RHINO, which held the same slot on the 2018 list. The RHINO is a 4-mana 4/5 with Trample that lightning helixes your opponent in the face when it enters the battlefield. That enter the battlefield ability is what made the RHINO truly great, because no matter what, he gave you significant value in a 6-point life swing. But even after that, he isn't that easy to kill, as 5 toughness puts him out of range of a lot of removal, and Trample makes him an effective attacker who can't be chump blocked. It was one of the most dominant cards in Standard while it was legal there. All of that power has meant that Siege RHINO's success hasn't been contained entirely to Standard, though it hasn't been nearly as dominant outside of that format. Still, it also helped make Abzan decks a thing in Modern, while also gaining points in other decks in the format like Junk and Birthing Pod. It also has a single point in Pioneer, coming in a Niv Mizzet Reborn deck. Siege Rhino seems likely to gain more points going forward, but kind of like HYDROID KRASIS, it's probably in some trouble in the long run, as there are several cards behind it that have gained a lot more than 7 points in the last 4 years. And at number 1, it is TREETOP Village, a creature land. It came in at number 1 on the 2018 list, too. It comes into play tapped and can only produce one color of mana, but it makes up for that by being able to turn into a 3/3 trampling ape for only 1 and a green. That's really good, especially when you consider the various advantages that creature lands have, like their immunity to sorcery speed removal and their ability to ensure decks continue to have a board state even in the aftermath of a board sweeper. This has led to it seeing a lot of play in multiple formats. One of the sweetest things you can do with the card is play it alongside Stand Still. Decks that do that are called Land Still, and they look to use creature lands after they play Stand Still to pressure the opponent. Eventually, your opponent has to do something about the fact that these trampling apes are attacking them, and you end up getting those 3 cards. But yeah, TREETOP Village has also just been played in a whole lot of decks that didn't have any special synergy for it, since it's just really nice to have a land that can become a very real win condition. While it isn't being played quite as much these days as it used to be played, it has an absolutely massive score and is still seeing enough play that I think it can hold on to this spot on the list for a while. So, those are the 10 Trample cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to trample over the competition with some of these cards, check out the description where you can find a direct CardKingdom link for each of them. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of MTG Top 10, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including several more that look at keyword abilities, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.